Welcome to Threadline History, where the past drifts by like a gentle breeze, and the stories of centuries unfold in a whisper. Close your eyes, take a breath, and let the quiet voice of history guide you to rest. This is your time. This is your story. Let's begin. Make sure to subscribe and comment where you are listening from. Enjoy. The year was 305 BC, and the sun rose over the island of Rhodes as if attempting to cleanse the blood that had soaked its fertile soil for months. The early morning winds swept across the whitewashed stone homes and bustling marketplaces, now eerily silent. Fishermen's nets hung limp and unused on the harbor walls, where once the sea had glittered with the sails of Rhodian trade ships. Now only fragments of warships, burnt, splintered, and sunken, remained. High atop the city walls, young Andronicos stood watch with a spear in hand. Though barely 17, he wore a soldier's breastplate, too large for his slender frame, and his eyes had already seen the horror of siege. Demetrius Poliorcetes, the so-called besieger of cities, had encircled Rhodes with the might of Macedon. The once thriving city, nestled like a jewel between three harbors, had become a prison of desperation. Each morning, Andronicos scanned the horizon. The great siege tower, Helios, still loomed to the west, an iron and wood monstrosity taller than any structure in Rhodes. For weeks, it had crept forward inch by inch, its bronze-plated skin glinting menacingly in the sun. Inside, thousands of enemy soldiers waited to unleash death upon the Rhodians. The boy's thoughts turned to his mother, who now worked in the infirmary beneath the temple of Athena, tending to the wounded. His father had perished in the first month of the siege, crushed under the debris of a crumbling bastion. In silence, Andronicos offered a short prayer to Helios, the sun god who watched over their island. Below, the city stirred. Despite the siege, Rhodes had not fallen into chaos. The council met each day in the sanctuary of Pythian Square, directing the defense with shrewd precision. Merchants, whose wealth once came from silk and spice, now brokered grain and water. Engineers devised countermeasures, reinforcing the city's walls and digging tunnels beneath the enemy camps. On this particular morning, a horn blast shattered the silence. From the eastern ramparts came cries. Demetrius had moved the Helios again. A dull grinding sound filled the air as massive wooden wheels turned, dragging the war tower closer. Rhodian archers scrambled to positions, their commander, Philon of Camarus, barking orders. "Hold your arrows, wait for my mark." Andronicos, standing beside Philon, tightened his grip. The enemy advanced. Moments later, hundreds of arrows darkened the sky. In the days that followed, the siege intensified. Demetrius unleashed battering rams, catapults, and firebolts upon the walls. His forces attempted to dig beneath the foundations, while Rhodian engineers responded with collapsing tunnels. Every assault was met with innovation, resilience, and divine faith. The city's priests held daily rituals atop the Acropolis, imploring Helios to grant them strength. It was said that the god had smiled upon them, for each of Demetrius' cleverest stratagems had failed. The Helios, once the terror of the siege, became a monument to futility. In a decisive moment, Rhodian fireboats sabotaged it by night, setting its timber ablaze. The inferno lit up the harbor like dawn, and the Rhodians cheered as its blackened remains fell to ruin. But victory came not only through divine intervention. General Timocrates, veteran of many wars, led the Rhodian counterattacks with unmatched discipline. In a bold maneuver, he sent elite hoplites through hidden sally ports, surprising Macedonian camps under moonlight. Supplies were stolen, tents burned, and enemy morale crumbled. Whispers of the Rhodians' invincibility began to spread, through the invaders' ranks. After months of failure and rising casualties, Demetrius withdrew. The Macedonian fleet, once a blockade that strangled the island, now retreated toward the eastern Aegean. Rhodes stood victorious. The city did not erupt in reckless celebration. Too many had died. Instead, the Rhodians gathered for a solemn procession to the temple of Helios. Young and old, warriors and widows, merchants and slaves, they came bearing oil, incense, and bronze shards scavenged from the battlefield. Chares of Lindos, a sculptor and engineer of great repute, watched silently from the temple steps. His tall frame bore the stoop of age, but his eyes burned with vision. He had studied under Lysippos, the master sculptor of Alexander the Great. Though he had earned wealth from busts of generals and gods, nothing in his life had prepared him for the moment that was coming. From the top of the temple, Archon Euclus raised his arms. "The sun has not abandoned us," he proclaimed, "and we shall not abandon our gratitude. We will honor Helios, who has watched over Rhodes with a tribute so mighty the world will tremble." There was murmuring among the crowd. "A statue," Euclus continued, "a titan of bronze, to guard our harbor and remind the world that even in darkness, light prevails." And so the idea of the Colossus of Rhodes was born. Chares returned to his workshop, disturbed yet inspired. He lit a small oil lamp, the flame flickering in front of a clay maquette he had sculpted during the siege. A stoic figure of Helios, hand raised to the heavens. He traced its contours with his fingers. Could such a form be made to stand not 3 cubits, not 10, but 35 meters tall? Could it withstand the ocean wind, the tremors of earth, the salt of the sea? He knew such a task would push the limits of engineering and artistry. Yet in the deepest chamber of his soul, he also knew it could be done. The council summoned him the next day. The project had been approved. Foreign patrons, grateful for Rhodes' resistance against Macedon, had promised vast wealth in donations. Gold would flow. Bronze would be melted from enemy weapons left on the field. "You shall lead this endeavor," Euclus said. "You shall sculpt Helios to pierce the clouds." Chares bowed deeply, then let him rise. The weeks that followed were filled with feverish planning. Chares convened with engineers, metalworkers, priests, and philosophers. They debated for days over proportion, posture, and materials. Would Helios stand with a spear or a flame? Would his gaze be fixed upon the horizon or upon the city he protected? In the end, a vision emerged. Helios would stand tall, one hand shielding his eyes from his own light, the other holding a cloak draped behind him. He would wear a radiant crown of bronze spikes to mimic the sun's rays. His feet would be planted firmly on a platform at the entrance to the harbor, not straddling it, as later myths would claim, but towering beside it, like a guardian. The site was chosen. The foundation was dug, and the first stones were laid under the blessing of Helios. Work began before dawn each day. Blocks of marble were dragged by oxen from nearby quarries. Scaffolds of cypress wood rose like ribs around the central pillar. The forge fires were reignited, this time not for weapons, but for glory. Rhodian children, who once played by the sea, now watched the base of a god grow inch by inch. Andronikos, no longer a watchman, but a young apprentice to the blacksmiths, returned to the harbor. With each melted ingot, each riveted plate, he felt the city heal. For Rhodes, battered but unbroken, was building not just a statue, they were building their legacy. Dawn broke over Rhodes in brilliant gold, as if Helios himself had leaned low to cast his blessing on the people below. The salt breeze carried the scent of hope, mingling with the distant clang of hammers striking molten bronze. At the edge of the harbor, the foundations of something divine stirred. Charis of Lindos stood on a platform of stone, surrounded by a half-circle of engineers and apprentices. In his weathered hands, he held a scroll of papyrus covered in charcoal sketches. Variations of arms raised, eyes gazing, robes flowing in defiance of gravity. Some showed Helios with a flaming torch, others with a radiant disk behind his head. All seemed smaller than what the sculptor saw in his mind's eye. "This is no mere statue," he said to his team. "This must be the soul of Rhodes, cast in bronze. It must awaken awe in every traveler who gazes upon it, from Phoenicia to Alexandria." One apprentice, a wiry young man named Nicandros, raised a hesitant voice. "But how can such weight be held so high? We've never forged a figure taller than a man, let alone a god." Charis smiled faintly. "Then we will learn, or we will die in the attempt." Over the following months, Charis and his engineers obsessed over proportion and stability. They consulted with scholars from the Library of Alexandria, corresponding by sea, and employed architects who had studied the pyramids and the Hanging Gardens. Earthquake resistance was critical. The god must not fall. They envisioned a network of iron and stone within the hollow bronze shell, like bone within muscle. Helios' body would be cast in hundreds of sections, each meticulously poured, cooled, polished, then hoisted by pulley systems and assembled on site. Funding came in torrents. The spoils left by Demetrius's army, siege engines, armor, even fragments of the Helepolis, were melted down and sold to allies of Rhodes, particularly Ptolemaic Egypt. Ambassadors from Cyprus, Pergamon, and Carthage sent gold and exotic gifts, eager to attach their name to the great work. Temples hosted auctions. Citizens offered heirlooms. Children carried small coins to the forges. The entire island moved to a rhythm dictated by bronze. Artists carved stories into the base stones. Scenes of the siege, of Rhodian heroes standing against impossible odds, of Helios parting the sky with his light. Mosaics lined the floors of surrounding plazas, and poets composed hymns to accompany the god's rise. The Colossus became more than an engineering feat. It became the spine of a cultural renaissance. Meanwhile, life returned to Rhodes. The Agora reopened. Theaters revived their comedies and epics. But even as laughter returned, the people whispered about the statue. Some saw it as a triumph of will. Others feared it was hubris. An elderly priestess of Demeter called it blasphemy. No man should raise a god in his own likeness. She was not alone. Quiet opposition grew in the shadowed corners of temples and noble homes. The Archon Eucles addressed these concerns before the city council. "This is not arrogance," he said. "This is gratitude. Helios delivered us from the jaws of death. We repay him with bronze, not for vanity, but for memory." A vote was taken, with public addresses and passionate speeches. The majority favored completion, but the seeds of dissent remained, sowing undercurrents that would persist for years. 2 years into construction, the base had risen high above the harbor walls. It was a marvel of carved stone and iron support beams, broad enough to support the god's legs. Scaffolding had climbed alongside it like a second skeleton. Chares oversaw every detail, his workshop now the beating heart of the island. Nicandros had matured from apprentice to foreman. His hands were calloused, his back bent, but his eyes shone with pride. "We've raised the thigh," he told Chares one morning. "We can begin the torso by summer." But not all was well. Accidents were frequent. One day, a pulley snapped, and a bronze plate crashed to the stones, crushing a mason. Another week, a section of scaffolding collapsed, injuring 2 men. Rumors of divine punishment spread. Chares wept in private. At night, he visited the temple alone and placed a small offering of wine, at the feet of Helios's sacred fire. "If I have offended, forgive me," he whispered. "If I have honored you wrongly, guide my hands to correction." The next morning, no accidents occurred. Work resumed with redoubled vigor. On the 5th year of construction, foreign dignitaries visited Rhodes to witness the marvel. From Rome came an envoy named Lucius Varro, skeptical and proud. "So this is your giant," he scoffed. "Your Sun King?" Chares met him personally, giving a tour of the forge, the winches, the casting pits. In another 2 summers, he will stand to the chest, and from there, the heavens themselves will tremble. Varro left impressed. He sent word home of the miracle being built in the east. From Babylon came astronomers who offered to calculate the angles of the sun so that the statue's shadow would tell time. From Athens came a young playwright who requested to stage a tragedy at the base of the rising god. Rhodes had become a beacon. By the 6th year, the face of Helios began to take shape, broad, serene, framed by rays of stylized bronze. The nose alone was taller than a man. Artisans climbed its curves daily, polishing and aligning. Inside the statue, ladders and tunnels allowed workers to navigate the god's hollow innards. At sunset, the light struck the half-finished crown and cast shadows across the sea. Fishermen began calling the reflection the Halo of Rhodes. Andronikos, now a young man and full smith, worked within the forge as a master of heat and flow. "I never thought I'd live to see peace again," he told Nicandros one day, "let alone create something eternal." Nicandros grinned. "We're building more than a god. We're building what comes after war." They paused as the gong struck noon, a deep resonance echoing from the Acropolis to the shipyards. All work halted for prayer. Even the most skeptical bowed before Helios at midday. But even gods faced danger. A tremor struck Rhodes late in the 7th year. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to frighten the workers. Chares spent sleepless nights examining the foundations. The joints held. The internal framework flexed just enough. Relief spread. Yet the tremor was a reminder. Nature bowed to no man, not even a sculptor of giants. Still they continued. With each sunrise, new bronze plates were hoisted upward. The god began to cast a silhouette across the harbor, his crown gleaming with the fire of 1,000 dawns. Poets said that Helios had come down from the sky to inhabit his image. Priests said nothing, but lit torches every night as if to appease the soul, now encased in metal. The god must rise. The forge fires roared day and night, their flames licking the sky like tongues of Helios himself. The air was thick with the acrid scent of burning wood and molten metal, a fragrance that had become as familiar to the islanders of Rhodes as the sea breeze or the morning sun. At the harbor's edge, the gigantic bronze plates gleamed faintly beneath the scattering stars, their surfaces glowing softly before being reheated again by relentless smiths and artisans. Among the workers, Andronikos moved with a purposeful rhythm honed by years of toil. His skin was weathered and streaked with soot, his hands scarred by contact with searing metal and sharp tools. Each morning, before the first light touched the city, he would arrive at the forge, already bathed in sweat from the humid night air. The weight of responsibility was as heavy as the hammer he wielded, but it was pride and devotion that kept him going. One day, as he labored at the casting pits, a sudden crash echoed through the work site. Men shouted, the clang of falling bronze, the sharp cry of pain. Andronikos dropped his hammer and ran toward the noise, heart pounding. He found young Demetrios, lying motionless beneath a shattered scaffold, blood mixed with dust, on the cobblestones. Despite the desperate efforts of the healers, the boy's eyes never opened again. A heavy silence descended over the forge that day, broken only by the whispered prayers of the workers. The loss was not isolated. Each week brought news of injuries, sometimes worse. The sheer scale of the project pushed men beyond human limits, and fear crept into the hearts of even the bravest. Tales of the god demanding sacrifice spread among the people. "The statue drinks blood," muttered some, their voices low and filled with dread. Chares of Lindos, the master sculptor, bore this burden silently. His vision had called the city to greatness, but it also summoned suffering. He spent nights pacing his chambers, haunted by faces, some fierce with determination, others slack with death. On a storm-racked evening, he found himself at the temple of Helios, alone beneath the flickering light of oil lamps. He knelt and whispered, "If this monument requires a price, let it be the price of our strength, not our souls. Guide me to build with care, with wisdom, so no more blood need stain the bronze." In the city, tension simmered. The council debated, merchants grumbled, and families clung to fading hopes. The old woman Callista, feared and shunned, spread her omens. The earth was angry, and Helios' light would turn dark. Archon Eucles summoned priests and soothsayers. Rites of purification followed. Sacred water sprinkled on the site. Incense burned in vast quantities. Sacrifices offered to appease gods both known and unknown. The people watched, some with relief, others with skepticism. Public debates unfolded in the agora. On one side stood those who argued for the statue's completion as a symbol of survival and pride. On the other, voices pleaded for caution, worried that continued construction risked inviting disaster. One afternoon, Lysandra, a fiery young priestess devoted to Helios, took the podium before a crowd gathered in the square. Her voice rang out clear and unwavering. "This statue is not a symbol of hubris, but of hope. It is our covenant to the sun god, our promise that Rhodes will endure beyond the darkness of war." Her words inspired many, yet the shadow of doubt lingered. As years passed, the strain on Rhodes' resources became undeniable. Farmers left fields untended. Food shortages worsened. The cost of bronze soared, and foreign donors, once generous, began to hesitate. Chares arranged envoys to distant lands, seeking new supplies and allies. Nicandros led teams through night shifts, urging exhausted smiths to press on. The god demands patience, but the city demands completion. Nicandros said one night, wiping grime from his brow, "We must not falter." Then the storm came, a tempest of fury. Winds shrieked, scaffolding groaned, and the sea surged beyond its bounds. When the skies cleared, devastation was revealed. Months of work lay shattered, lives lost. Chares stood amid the wreckage, fury burning in his eyes. "Helios tests our resolve," he declared. "We shall rise anew, like the sun after the darkest night." Amid this struggle, personal stories blossomed. Andronikos found friendship and love in Melita, a metal worker whose delicate artistry adorned Helios' crown with filigree of sunlight and flame. One evening, they shared quiet words over the glow of the forge. "I fear this work will break us," Melita confessed, "but I cannot turn away. This is our legacy for those who come after." Andronikos took her hand. "We carry the weight of generations, and with it, the light." The project's hardships echoed in the arts. Poets sang of sacrifice and glory. Theaters echoed with tales of fate and courage. Religious ceremonies wove the statue into the city's soul. Enemies lurked beyond the horizon. Pirates prowled the Aegean. Rival city-states eyed Rhodes' wealth and power with envy. The council strengthened defenses, while guards were posted to protect the sacred site. The Colossus neared completion. A beacon of sun and sacrifice, it was now the heart of Rhodes itself. Days bled into weeks, and the city's rhythm slowed under the colossal weight of the project. The sounds of laughter and song that once filled the marketplaces grew faint beneath the clamor of hammers and chains. Mothers watched anxiously as their sons and husbands labored beneath the statue's growing shadow, their hands blistered and faces smudged with soot. The younger children, too small to work at the forge, gathered at the harbor's edge, staring wide-eyed at the monstrous figure rising toward the heavens. Among the smiths, stories of the past siege were told in quiet moments, a reminder of the island's narrow escape from destruction. Andronikos often found himself recounting the siege's darkest days to Melita as they worked side by side. We forged this statue not only from bronze, but from the spirit of every Rhodian who dared to stand when the world threatened to crush us, he would say, his voice low with reverence. Melita smiled softly, her hands deftly shaping a tiny sunbeam motif, destined for the god's crown. Then our labor carries not just metal, but memory. We bind the city's soul to Helios. But the burden was not borne evenly. The exhaustion etched into the faces of the workers deepened, and some began to falter under the unrelenting pace. There were moments when Andronikos caught himself doubting whether the god would ever truly rise, whether the city's sacrifices might be in vain. Yet every evening, as the sun dipped beneath the horizon, the bronze shimmered anew, reminding them all of the purpose that bound them. The Colossus was no longer simply a statue. It was a promise etched in fire and sweat, a radiant oath that Rhodes would endure beyond the shadow of war. Still, whispers of ill fate lingered, carried by the sea winds like scattered leaves. Old Callista's warnings grew louder in hushed conversations, and tensions simmered in the city's heart. But in the forge, amid the heat and hammer, the people of Rhodes hammered out their doubts, forging instead a future from bronze and blood. The first light of dawn crept over the island of Rhodes, igniting the horizon with streaks of gold and rose. The air was still, charged with a hushed reverence that seemed to hold the entire city in a sacred pause. For years, the island had labored under the watchful gaze of Helios, shaping molten bronze and stone into a towering monument that would forever mark the resilience and spirit of its people. Now, at last, the Colossus stood on the precipice of completion. From the harbor's edge, Andronikos gazed upward at the immense figure that loomed over the city like a living titan. The statue's bronze skin shimmered with a fiery glow, as if catching and reflecting the very essence of the sun god himself. Each hammered plate, each carefully sculpted feature, told the story of a city battered but unbowed, forged by fire and sacrifice. Beside him, Melita adjusted the final fittings of the radiant crown that would soon encircle Helios' head, a circle of bronze spikes designed to mimic the rays of the sun, glowing and eternal. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fatigue, but from the overwhelming magnitude of the moment. The final touch, she whispered softly, the sun's own halo. Chares of Lindos moved among them, his once powerful frame now frail, but his eyes bright and sharp. His voice carried the weight of years, a blend of pride and solemnity. We have ascended beyond mere craftsmanship. This is not just a statue, but a beacon of hope and defiance, a promise etched in bronze that Rhodes will never again bow to shadow. The city pulsed beneath the Colossus. Markets buzzed with merchants eager to glimpse the new wonder. Priests prepared grand ceremonies. Children whispered tales of the mighty god watching over them. The entire island seemed to hold its breath, caught between history and legend. Yet beneath the awe, there was an undercurrent of tension. The years of relentless labor had taken their toll on the people. Families mourned those who had fallen in service of the monument. Others worried whether the statue would truly safeguard Rhodes or become a monument to hubris. Within the council chambers, debates raged. Some leaders called for lavish celebrations to mark the occasion. Others urged prudence, wary of provoking the envy of rival city-states or the wrath of the gods. Amid these discussions, Lysandra, the passionate priestess of Helios, stood firm. She rallied the faithful, urging unity and faith. "The Colossus is our shield and our sword," she declared in the temple's great hall. "It embodies the light that drives away darkness and the courage that defies despair." As the day wore on, preparations for the unveiling ceremony accelerated. Artisans carved intricate reliefs depicting the island's storied history onto marble plinths. Musicians rehearsed hymns that would echo through the harbor. Soldiers polished their armor for the honor guard. Andronikos found himself drawn into a small crowd gathered at the statue's base. He watched as Chares, with deliberate ceremony, began the ritual of consecration, pouring sacred oils, sprinkling water blessed by the priests, and invoking Helios' blessing upon the bronze giant. The sun climbed higher, its rays caught and multiplied by the statue's gleaming surface, casting dancing lights across the harbor. A gentle breeze carried the scent of incense and fresh olive branches, weaving through the throng. But not all eyes were filled with wonder. From the shadowed docks, envoys from neighboring city-states observed with cold calculation. Jealousy simmered beneath their composed facades. The Colossus was not only a symbol, it was a statement of power and independence. Rumors whispered of plots and intrigues, and the island's commanders tightened security. The men who had once wielded swords against Demetrius' armies now stood vigilant against threats both seen and unseen. As twilight approached, the people of Rhodes gathered on the harbor's edge. The final moment had come. The great statue stood towering over the entrance to the harbor, its feet planted firmly on the earth, its gaze fixed toward the rising sun. For a moment, all noise ceased. The waves, the wind, even the murmurs of the crowd fell silent. Then Lysandra stepped forward, raising her hands in solemn invocation. "Helios, radiant and eternal, we offer this tribute in gratitude and hope. May your light shine ever upon Rhodes, our guardian and our guide." A chorus of voices rose, joined by the ringing of temple bells and the beating of war drums. Flames were lit, torches carried high, and the night blossomed into a festival of light and song. The Colossus, bathed in firelight, seemed to come alive. Its bronze form glowed like molten gold, casting long shadows that danced with the flickering flames. The people cheered, their voices carried over the sea, a testament to their triumph and their faith. Andronikos stood among them, his heart swelling with pride and relief. Beside him, Melita's eyes shone with tears. The dawn of a new era had arrived. The celebrations lasted deep into the night, with laughter and music spilling into the streets and across the harbor. Yet beneath the revelry, Andronikos remained contemplative. The Colossus stood proud and magnificent, but he knew all too well the cost that had birthed it. Each gleaming bronze plate carried the weight of sacrifice, the lives lost, the sweat poured into the flames, the shattered dreams of those who would never see Rhodes' future. In a quieter moment, Andronikos found Melita beneath the statue's great foot. The air was cooler here, touched by the sea's breath and the lingering scent of incense. She traced the delicate sunbeams woven into the bronze crown, her fingers light but steady. "It is more beautiful than I imagined," she murmured. "And more fragile than it seems," Andronikos replied. "The gods demand not just gifts, but vigilance. This statue is a promise but promises must be kept. Melita met his gaze, her eyes reflecting the flickering torchlight. "Do you think Helios will protect us? Or is this just a monument to our pride?" He hesitated. "I do not know, but I believe in the people of Rhodes, their courage, their heart. That is the true light." Meanwhile, Chares of Lindos prepared for the final rites. The frailty of his body was clear, but his spirit blazed fiercely. He gathered with the city's elders and priests beneath the statue's shadow, each man a living testament to Rhodes's resilience. Chares spoke solemnly. "This statue is not an end, but a beginning, a symbol that we, as a city and a people, will rise again from every trial. Helios' light shines through our unity." Archon Eucles nodded gravely. "We must ensure that this symbol endures, not just in bronze, but in the hearts of every Rhodian." The following days brought renewed vigor to the city's defenses. Envoys from Athens and Sparta arrived, their faces polite but unreadable. The islanders welcomed them cautiously, aware that the Colossus' shadow stretched far beyond mere stone and metal. It was a beacon that stirred both admiration and envy. The harbor bustled with activity as new ships arrived laden with grain and supplies, gifts from allies and merchants eager to strengthen ties. Rhodes was not just celebrating a statue, it was asserting itself as a power in the ancient world. Yet in the quiet moments, fear whispered beneath the triumph. One evening, as the sun sank low, Lysandra visited the temple alone. The flickering shadows danced against the marble walls as she knelt before the altar, praying fervently. "Helios, guardian of Rhodes," she whispered, "protect this city from the darkness that seeks to consume it. Let your light be a shield and a sword." Her prayers were answered that very night. A storm unlike any before tore through the Aegean, dark clouds rolling in with thunderous roars. Lightning struck the sea, sending waves crashing over the harbor walls. The winds howled like wild beasts, threatening to tear down even the mighty Colossus. The city's defenders scrambled to secure gates and anchor ships. Andronikos, Melita, and many others worked through the tempest, their bodies drenched and trembling, their spirits tested anew. When dawn finally broke, the island was battered but standing. The Colossus, though battered by salt and storm, remained upright, its bronze surface gleaming defiantly in the early light. The storm became legend, a story told and retold by poets and parents alike, a testament to the strength of Rhodes and its sun god. Yet it was a reminder that even the mightiest monument must face the wrath of nature and fate. In the weeks that followed, Rhodes flourished. The Colossus became a magnet for travelers, merchants, and scholars, each drawn to the island by tales of the bronze giant and the city that had dared to defy the odds. Andronikos found himself teaching young apprentices the art of bronze work, passing on the knowledge that had saved and shaped Rhodes. Melita, too, blossomed into a master artisan, her work on the Colossus celebrated far and wide. But the shadow of hubris lingered. Rival cities whispered of curses and omens. Jealous eyes watched for weakness, and threats, both subtle and overt, emerged. One night, a fire broke out near the docks. Whether accident or sabotage, it was a stark reminder that Rhodes's enemies remained ever vigilant. The council responded swiftly, bolstering guards and fortifications. The Colossus was more than a statue. It was a statement of defiance that demanded protection. As the chapter closes, Andronikos looks toward the horizon, the rising sun bathing the Colossus in golden light. This is only the beginning, he thinks. Our city's fate will be tested again and again. But as long as Helios watches over us, and as long as we remember what we fought for, Rhodes will endure. The dawn painted the harbor of Rhodes in hues of pale gold and amber, its waters shimmering softly beneath the first light. From the vantage point of the city's highest walls, the Colossus stood majestic and unyielding, a bronze sentinel etched against the morning sky. Sailors returning from long voyages spotted the gleaming figure long before the island itself came into view, guided home by the steady gaze of Helios, protector of Rhodes. But beneath this radiant symbol, the city was a tinderbox. The triumph of the Colossus had not sealed Rhodes' fate in unchallenged glory. Instead, it had set the stage for a complex dance of power, fear, and fragile alliances. The scars of war still marked many hearts and homes. The sacrifices made to birth the statue were etched in the memories of every family that had lost a son or husband. And the city's triumph was shadowed by whispered doubts. The city's pulse was uneven, a mixture of hope and anxiety, pride and fear. Andronikos, now in his early 20s, could feel the tension gripping the air as palpably as the morning breeze carried the scent of the sea and fresh olives. The Colossus was more than metal and stone. It was a beacon, yes, but also a challenge to all who saw it, a promise of strength, but an invitation to enmity. Andronikos walked through the bustling streets, the sound of his sandals clicking against the stone paving, mingling with the morning chorus of merchants hawking spices, fishermen unloading nets heavy with silver fish, and artisans preparing their wares. The marketplace was alive with color and noise, yet Andronikos sensed undercurrents of unease. Faces that once gleamed with pride now often bore shadows of worry or suspicion. The years of siege and construction had changed Rhodes profoundly. The city had grown wealthier, its harbors busier, but the cost had been steep. Food prices had risen, and some families still struggled to rebuild what the siege had shattered. More troubling were the murmurs of discontent from factions within the city, those who questioned the wisdom of erecting such a colossal monument at such expense, fearing it had painted a target on Rhodes' back. Andronikos had heard the voices too, the merchants grumbling about new taxes, the veterans lamenting lost comrades, and the city elders debating whether the Colossus' glory was worth the unrest it invited. A subtle shift was taking place, one that threatened the fragile unity Rhodes had fought so hard to achieve. As Andronikos passed a narrow alley, he caught sight of a furtive figure slipping into the shadows. The man's hurried steps and darting eyes betrayed him. Rhodes was no stranger to spies, and Andronikos' instincts told him that the piece was more fragile than it appeared. Back at the harbor, Melita was overseeing preparations for the upcoming festival in honor of Helios. The air was heavy with the scent of fresh olive branches and burning frankincense. Stalls draped in vibrant fabrics were being set up along the quay, where minstrels and dancers would soon entertain the crowds. Melita's thoughts, however, were not on celebration. She was haunted by growing rumors, tales of secret meetings between foreign envoys, whispers of plots to undermine Rhodes from within. Her hands, skilled in delicate metalwork, clenched unconsciously around a brass chisel. "We have built the Colossus to protect us, yet protection requires vigilance beyond bronze and fire," she confided to Andronikos when he joined her later that afternoon. Together, they watched the bronze giant loom above, its crown catching the dying light. To many, Helios was a god. To them, it was a symbol of a city that refused to bow. Meanwhile, within the marble halls of the council, debates grew heated. Archon Euclid presided with a heavy heart. The honor of Rhodes was at stake, but so was its fragile peace. "We must fortify our defenses," Euclid urged, "and root out those who would see us fall. The Colossus may deter armies, but it cannot shield us from betrayal." Some councilmen nodded grimly. Others whispered fears that such actions might provoke greater unrest or draw unwanted attention from jealous neighbors. Lysandra, the priestess, raised her voice in the chamber. Faith in Helios must not waver. This city was forged by the light and will endure by it. We must stand united. Yet unity was proving elusive. One evening, as shadows lengthened across the city, Andronikos received a secret message, an anonymous note warning of a plot to destabilize Rhodes by sabotage. The note spoke of shadowy figures meeting beneath the city, conspiring to strike at the Colossus itself. Determined to uncover the truth, Andronikos enlisted the help of trusted friends, Melita, now a master artisan, and Nikandros, a seasoned soldier who had fought bravely during the siege. Under the cloak of night, the trio ventured through winding alleys and forgotten tunnels beneath the city. They uncovered signs of covert gatherings, whispered plans, and threats spoken in languages foreign to Rhodes. The threat was real, and it came from within. The city's night was alive with secrets. Lanterns flickered uncertainly against the creeping darkness, shadows shifting like specters along the walls. The three companions moved silently, their footsteps muffled against cold stone. Each corner revealed further clues: a hastily discarded cloak embroidered with foreign sigils, scraps of parchment inscribed with coded messages, and faint echoes of voices plotting revolt. Andronikos felt the weight of history pressing upon him. The Colossus had been born from unity and sacrifice. Yet now, the very heart of Rhodes beat with discord. He wondered if the statue's grandeur could hold back the fractures threatening to rend the city apart. Tensions escalated further when a fire broke out near the docks. Though quickly contained, the blaze sent a clear message: no place in Rhodes was beyond danger. Smoke curled into the sky, a dark ribbon against the golden sunset, and the city's nerves frayed. Guards doubled their patrols, questioning strangers and watching for signs of conspiracy. Andronikos, Melita, and Nikandros coordinated efforts to strengthen watch points, rally the citizenry, and maintain order. Meanwhile, life went on amid the unrest. Families gathered in courtyards, sharing meals beneath the shadow of the Colossus. Children played games that mimicked warriors and gods, their laughter a brief respite from the city's worries. Minstrels sang of Helios's glory, weaving tales of hope to steady, frayed hearts. Melita and Andronikos found moments of quiet in these times, a chance to dream beyond the looming threats. This statue, it is not just bronze, Melita said softly one evening as they stood beneath Helios's outstretched hand. It holds our stories, our fears, our strength. Andronikos nodded. It will guide us through the darkness, as long as we do not forget what it stands for. The council convened once more, the air thick with urgency. Plans were laid for greater defenses, for alliances forged anew with distant city-states, and for uncovering the full extent of the internal threat. Archon Euclid spoke with determination. Rhodes will stand, not because of bronze alone, but because its people will not yield. Lysandra offered prayers and rituals to Helios, seeking divine favor to shield the city. The chapter's closing days saw Rhodes bracing for what lay ahead. The Colossus loomed ever watchful, its bronze skin catching the sun's last rays each evening, a silent guardian against both visible foes and those lurking in the shadows. Andronikos gazed toward the horizon, the fading light reflecting in his eyes. Somewhere beyond, new dangers awaited. Yet beneath the watchful gaze of Helios, Rhodes would not falter. The sun had barely risen over Rhodes when a chilling breeze swept through the harbor, carrying with it the faint scent of salt, dust, and unease. The Colossus stood as a silent sentinel, its bronze limbs towering over the city like a colossal guardian against the endless sky. But beneath its steady gaze, the people of Rhodes felt the stirrings of a different kind of storm, one that no blade or siege tower could fight. Inside the marble halls of the council, Archon Euclid paced with restless urgency. The days since the mysterious fire at the docks had been filled with whispers and shadows. Spies and saboteurs had woven their webs deep within the city's walls. Rhodes, proud and resilient, now grappled with enemies cloaked not in armor, but in secrets. Euclid's voice rang out sharply as he addressed the gathered councilmen, their faces etched with concern and fatigue. We face a threat more dangerous than any army, one from within. If the conspirators succeed, the Colossus will fall, and with it, our spirit. We cannot let this happen. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Some councilmen exchanged glances, while others clenched fists in silent agreement. Across the city, Lysandra stood at the altar of Helios, her eyes lifted toward the brightening sky. The priestess prayed fervently, seeking guidance and strength for the city she loved. The Colossus was more than a statue to her. It was a symbol of hope, a promise of protection, granted by the sun god himself. But even the god's favor felt tenuous amidst the growing darkness. Andronikos, Melita, and Nicandros convened in a secluded chamber beneath the city, their voices low but urgent. The discovery of secret meetings in the tunnels had only deepened the mystery. "There are factions working against us," Nicandros said grimly, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "Some seek to profit from chaos, others hunger for power." Melita nodded, her brow furrowed in thought. "We cannot trust anyone outside this circle. Even those who claim loyalty may hide their true intentions." Andronikos felt the weight of responsibility heavy on his shoulders. The Colossus was their city's soul, and now it seemed vulnerable in a way none had anticipated. "We must uncover the conspirators and stop them before it's too late," he said firmly. Over the following weeks, Rhodes simmered with tension. Guards patrolled day and night, checkpoints scrutinized every traveler, and the city's mood shifted from hopeful celebration to wary vigilance. The festival for Helios, once a joyous occasion, became a somber reminder of what was at stake. In the shadows, spies whispered in hidden alcoves, plotting to exploit fractures within the city. Their voices carried in coded messages and clandestine symbols, sowing distrust among allies and neighbors alike. Yet amidst the turmoil, the people of Rhodes clung to the Colossus as a symbol of unity and resilience. Artists painted murals depicting Helios's triumph. Poets composed verses praising the sun god's eternal watch, and children played beneath the statue's towering feet, their laughter a fragile counterpoint to the city's unease. One evening, as a blood-red sunset bled across the sky, Andronikos met Melita near the harbor. The bronze statue loomed above them, its face serene, yet resolute against the dying light. "We are guardians now," Andronikos said quietly, "not just of the statue, but of everything it represents." Melita smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting the fiery horizon. "And we cannot let fear blind us. The light of Helios shines brightest in the darkest time." They stood together in silence, watching as the city prepared to face the unknown. The next days brought startling revelations. Through careful investigation and courage, Andronikos and his allies uncovered a network of traitors, merchants conspiring with foreign powers, disgruntled nobles seeking to tip the balance, and spies sent to weaken Rhodes before a greater assault. Their findings shocked the council and the people alike. The city was not only threatened by external enemies, but by those within who had lost sight of Rhodes' true strength. Archon Euclus convened an emergency assembly. "This betrayal cuts deep," he declared, "but Rhodes will endure. We must root out corruption and reaffirm our unity." To bolster the city's defenses, new measures were introduced. Training intensified for the militia, walls were reinforced, and watchtowers erected to scan the horizon. Diplomats hastened to renew alliances with Athens, Sparta, and other city-states seeking support and solidarity. Lysandra led public ceremonies invoking Helios's protection, rekindling the faith of the people. Her prayers echoed through the temples, weaving hope into the fabric of the city. Yet even as Rhodes prepared for battle, a lingering fear gnawed at Andronikos. The conspirators were clever and relentless. He often found himself staring at the Colossus during quiet moments, wondering if the statue's bronze form could withstand the storms to come, not just those of nature, but those born of human ambition and betrayal. One night, a messenger arrived with urgent news. A faction of conspirators planned to strike at the heart of Rhodes during the next full moon, targeting the harbor and the Colossus itself. The city sprang into action. Guards doubled their watch. Secret passages were sealed, and the populace was urged to remain vigilant. Andronikos, Melita, and Nicandros prepared for the confrontation ahead, their resolve unyielding. As the full moon rose high, casting silver light over Rhodes, shadows moved beneath the harbor's edge. The conspirators struck swiftly, attempting to sabotage the statue's foundation and cripple the city's defenses. But Rhodes was ready. Alerted by vigilant guards, Andronikos and his comrades intercepted the attackers. A fierce battle ensued beneath the looming shadow of Helios. Bronze clashed against steel. Voices shouted commands, and the night air was thick with the smell of smoke and salt. In the end, Rhodes prevailed. The conspirators were driven back, their plans thwarted, but the cost was grave. Lives were lost, and the city's scars deepened. The dawn after the battle found Rhodes weary but unbroken. The Colossus stood tall, its bronze surface gleaming with the first rays of sun, a steadfast reminder of the city's enduring spirit. In the days that followed, Andronikos and Melita walked among their people, offering comfort and hope. The city had faced its darkest hour and emerged stronger. The chapter closes with a scene atop the Acropolis, where Lysandra leads a solemn ceremony. Flames dance in bronze bowls, incense rises in spirals, and the voices of the faithful join in hymns to Helios. Andronikos watches from below, feeling the weight of the future pressing on him. The Colossus had survived the night, but the winds of change were blowing. Rhodes' destiny remained unwritten, a story still unfolding beneath the eternal light of the sun god. It began with a tremor, a subtle shudder beneath the marble columns of the Temple of Athena. At first, the people of Rhodes dismissed it as nothing more than the island shifting in its sleep. Earthquakes, while not frequent, were not unknown. But this was different. Within hours, another followed, stronger, deeper, unsettling the seabirds that circled the harbor. By the third day, the tremors had become a daily intrusion. Cups clinked unnaturally on tables, and hanging oil lamps swayed like pendulums in even the stillest rooms. Children paused their play. Traders glanced warily at the ground. Farmers whispered to the sky. And always, the eyes of the city turned upward to the figure of Helios, the Colossus, the titan of bronze who watched silently from the harbor. The statue stood as it always had, immutable and serene. But Andronikos, now a seasoned watchman of Rhodes, felt unease rise like bile in his chest. He watched the Colossus not with awe but with anxiety. The statue was not built for motion, and yet the earth beneath it was shifting. Council meetings became emergency sessions. Architects and engineers were summoned. Chares of Lindo's original plans were studied by torchlight. Artisans, builders, and laborers inspected the statue's base daily, noting every faint creak of metal, every new crack in the foundation stones. The priests assured the people that Helios had not abandoned them, but their voices trembled with uncertainty. Melita, now a master smith and keeper of the bronze sanctuaries, stood beneath the towering form she had helped shape. Her fingertips ran along the seams of metal, feeling for vibrations, for whispers of stress. She had once shaped this monument with pride. Now she feared she might witness its fall. Nicandros, veteran and now captain of the city guard, oversaw preparations for disaster. If the worst should come, he told the council, we must ensure that the people can evacuate the harbor. If the statue falls, it will not fall quietly. Meanwhile, strange omens multiplied. Fishermen reported that the fish had fled the coastal waters. A pod of dolphins was found beached on the northern shore. Flocks of birds changed their migration patterns. The skies darkened with unnatural clouds that loomed heavy over the southern horizon. Even the moon, normally a comforting silver coin in the night, hung blood red on more than one occasion. Cattle lowed uneasily. Dogs barked at shadows. The sick grew sicker, and the old spoke of ancient prophecies they had once dismissed. It was as if nature itself had turned its face away from the island. The sea grew strangely warm. At night, the stars shimmered too brightly, as though the heavens themselves strained under unseen pressure. Lysandra, the high priestess, withdrew to the temple in silence. For days, she fasted and prayed beneath the sacred sun altar. When she emerged, her eyes were hollow but resolute. This is not punishment, she told the council. It is transformation. The earth speaks. We must listen. But the earth no longer whispered. It roared. On the 12th night after the first tremor, Rhodes was struck by a quake unlike any in living memory. It came without warning, splitting the ground with a thunderous cry. Homes crumbled, statues toppled, and fountains burst into geysers of shattered stone and water. The night was filled with screams, the bleating of animals, and the thunder of collapsing walls. And on the harbor, Helios moved. The base stones cracked first. Then the immense legs, once rooted in strength, began to twist. The inner iron skeleton groaned, rivets bursting like seeds from overripe fruit. One arm, stretched skyward in eternal salute, wavered. Andronikos had rushed to the harbor with Nicandros and a team of soldiers. Together they watched in horror as the Colossus, their pride, their legacy, let out a scream of tearing metal that echoed across the bay. In one final shudder, it broke at the knees. The great bronze god fell. The collapse took only seconds. The torso struck the stone pier with a thunderous crack. The head crashed through a merchant's warehouse, and one outstretched arm landed half submerged in the shallows of the harbor, where it would remain for generations. Dust and debris rained down, and the sea, as if in mourning, surged inland. When morning came, the city stood in silence. The quake had passed, but its shadow lingered. Hundreds were dead, thousands injured. Rhodes, scarred and grieving, stood amid its ruins, and the Colossus was no more. Melita wept openly, cradling a bronze fragment in her arms as if it were a child. "We gave him form," she whispered, "and now he returns to the earth." Lysandra led the rites of mourning. No festival was declared. No victory songs were sung. Instead, the people of Rhodes gathered by the sea, lighting lanterns and casting them adrift to honor the fallen, both the citizens and the god of bronze. But from that grief, a question arose. What now? The council debated fiercely. Some argued for reconstruction, to rebuild Helios as he had been. Others said it was a sign that such pride was hubris, and the fallen god should be left as he lay. Foreign emissaries sent condolences, some genuine, others opportunistic. Traders from Egypt offered gold to claim pieces of the fallen statue. The Ptolemies suggested removing it entirely, replacing it with a lighthouse or fortress. Andronikos spoke simply, "Let him remain. Let the world see that even gods fall." In the end, they agreed. The ruins of the Colossus would be left untouched, a testament to what Rhodes had built and lost. Years passed. Children played on the fallen limbs. Travelers came from across the sea to walk among the scattered pieces. Poets sang of the god who once watched the waves, and though the statue no longer stood, its spirit remained. In the hearts of the Rhodians, in the tales told by firelight, in the sun that still rose each day, Helios endured. The hammer of the earth had struck, but Rhodes did not shatter. The people stood. The harbor thrived. The memory of bronze became legend. Generations of Rhodians grew up in the statue's shadow, climbing the ruins, exploring the hollows of its limbs, and hearing tales of the days when Helios stood above them, proud and unshaken. Writers from distant lands penned scrolls about the fallen god. Chroniclers etched his story into temple walls, and sailors whispered of the broken statue that still watched the seas in silence. It became not just a site of memory, but of pilgrimage, a holy place not for worship of perfection, but of endurance. And even in ruin, the Colossus cast a long and unbroken shadow. Seasons changed. The sun still rose over Rhodes, but its light felt different, less triumphant, more contemplative. The Colossus no longer crowned the harbor with divine stature, but in absence, its power took on a new form. What had been a statue of glory became a monument of memory, and memory, it seemed, could move mountains. The fallen limbs of Helios became a place of pilgrimage. Ships brought poets and philosophers, artisans and scribes, each eager to behold the wreckage that had once defied the sky. Some came to mourn, others to study, but most arrived to stand in the presence of something larger than themselves, even if it now lay broken. Among the locals, a quiet renaissance began. Stories circulated like currency. Grandparents who had seen the statue stand told their grandchildren what it looked like in the light of dawn. Musicians composed laments that echoed through the agora, played on lyres, and reed flutes in gentle, yearning melodies. Artists painted the fallen giant in 100 shades. Some depicted it lying peacefully across the earth, others imagined it rising again from the ground like a phoenix of bronze. Melita, her hair now threaded with silver, took young apprentices under her wing. In the glow of her forge, she hammered out pieces of bronze, not for weapons or tools, but for memory. She sculpted miniature replicas of the Colossus, one hand uplifted, one foot stepping forward, and gave them to families who had lost loved ones in the quake. Each statue bore an inscription. "He fell, but we did not." These replicas, once simple tokens of remembrance, grew to become sacred symbols. Some Rhodians placed them in their homes beside ancestral shrines. Others carried them in pouches for luck and courage. Merchants placed them in their ledgers. Farmers kept them at the edges of their fields. Over time, new rituals formed around them. The lighting of a lamp at sunset, the whispering of a name when passing the harbor's ruins, the pouring of wine not just to the gods above, but to the one who had once stood among them. Bronze smiths from across the Aegean came to learn from Melita, not merely to study her craft, but to understand her reverence. To her, bronze was not just metal, it was memory cast in light. She would speak softly to her students. "We do not forge Helios anew. We forge what remains of him within us." Andronikos, though weary, still walked the harbor at dawn, a guardian not of stone, but of spirit. He greeted the sailors and merchants as he always had, but now he was also a storyteller. Children ran to him and asked, "Did you see the Colossus fall?" And he would nod solemnly and begin his tale not as a tragedy, but as a parable of strength. "It was the earth that struck," he would say, "not our will." Sometimes he would lead groups to the scattered pieces, now softened by salt and time. He would place a hand on the bronze and whisper, "He still listens." And when storms came and waves crashed and people feared what might break again, it was Andronikos they sought. He never spoke of fear, only of resilience. In his twilight years, he was honored not with marble or metal, but with a stone bench near the ruins, etched simply, "The Watcher of the Light." Children still leave flowers there. The council shifted with the times. Gone were the loud debates of reconstruction. Instead, they focused on renewal. They fortified schools, improved roads, and invested in civic life. Rhodes would not try to recreate the past, but it would honor it. Statues were commissioned, not of gods, but of the citizens who had helped rebuild. A healer who worked through the night. A soldier who dug survivors from rubble. A child who sang to keep spirits high. Civic holidays were reinvented. One such day, known as the Day of Light, honored the resilience of the people. Lanterns were floated into the harbor. Songs were sung. Dancers filled the streets. It was not about what had been lost, but what had been preserved. The soul of a city, forged in the fire of calamity. Meanwhile, a curious wind blew through the Mediterranean. Tales of the fallen giant spread across empires. In Alexandria, philosophers debated its meaning. In Rome, artists etched its story into mosaics. In the distant East, travelers wrote of a god who had once bestrode the world and now lay sleeping by the sea. One day, a delegation arrived from Athens. Among them was a young philosopher named Damon, who had read every scroll on the Colossus and yearned to see it himself. He found Lysandra in her temple garden, tending sunflowers in quiet meditation. Damon bowed low. "I came to study the fall," he said, "but I find the rising more extraordinary." Lysandra smiled. "Then you have come for the right reasons." That night, Damon joined a small gathering in the agora. Elders, laborers, merchants, and children sat in a circle, telling stories of Helios. The moon rose full and luminous over the harbor, casting silver light on the outstretched bronze hand, still half submerged in the shallows. One girl, barely old enough to hold a stylus, recited a poem she had written, "When giants fall, the earth does shake, yet we, the small, still rise and wake. For in the echo of their cry, we learn not just to fall, but fly." Silence followed, then applause, and laughter, and weeping. Damon, inspired, would later write a treatise titled "The Soul of the Colossus," in which he argued that the statue's destruction had made it more immortal than its presence ever could. It was, he wrote, a god made not only of bronze, but of breath, story, and light. Years passed. Rhodes thrived in its new identity. The harbor bustled. The markets were full. The people sang not only of glory, but of resilience. And through it all, the ruins of the Colossus stood silent, eternal. Even broken, it had become a cornerstone of the city's soul. Even fallen, it stood tall. Some said they saw the sun catch on the ruins at just the right angle, as if the god's eye still watched them, his hand still reaching. Others claimed dreams where Helios walked again, not as a conqueror, but as a companion. Even foreign poets began invoking the fallen Colossus in their verses, not as a relic, but as an ideal. The memory of the statue had become more than its form. It was a language, a legacy, a hymn to human hope. It echoed in the clang of a blacksmith's hammer, in the shout of a child playing near the harbor, in the quiet reverence of travelers laying garlands beside ancient bronze. The Colossus no longer stood, but it no longer needed to. For as long as the people of Rhodes remembered, as long as the waves whispered his name, Helios endured. And still, every morning, the sun rose. The morning sea mist lingered low across the port of Rhodes, curling around the remnants of the Colossus like incense in a sanctum. It was an ordinary day, but the kind of ordinary that had, over the decades, become sacred. Merchants set out their stalls, their voices mixing with the cries of seabirds and the distant pounding of waves. Fishermen repaired their nets with skilled, practiced hands, while priests moved silently among weather-worn altars, lighting lamps that flickered with soft golden light. Above all, the ruins of the god still watched, silent sentinels of memory and loss. Yet beneath this calm veneer stirred a new force, legacy, not the kind carved in stone or cast in metal, but a living legacy, breathed, taught, and carried by those who came after, each generation adding its own chapter to the story. Lycon, a bright-eyed student of philosophy, stood before the great bronze foot, half buried in sand. His gaze traced the weathered surface, where the green patina of age softened once sharp edges. He carried with him a bundle of scrolls, worn at the edges from frequent reading, and a restless energy that pushed him onward. His mentor, Damon, the philosopher who had once spoken with Lysandra, had passed down the tradition of reverence and reason, urging his pupils to look beyond the broken statue to the enduring spirit it represented. Now, Lycon studied not just the remains of the statue, but the echo it left in the hearts of the people. And he understood that the Colossus had become something greater than bronze and stone. He was not alone in this pursuit. A new generation of builders, dreamers, and thinkers had emerged in Rhodes. They gathered in the bustling agora to debate, not whether to rebuild the Colossus, but how best to honor the lessons it had imparted. Was it a warning against hubris, a reminder of divine favor, or something deeper, proof that true greatness lay not in height or size, but in the memory that survived the fall? Melita, the master bronzesmith, who had once forged fragments of the Colossus into tokens of remembrance, had passed peacefully after a long and fruitful life. Yet her apprentices carried on her legacy, expanding her humble workshop into the renowned Academy of Bronze, a place where metallurgy met memory, where art was more than craft, but a language of the soul. There, students not only learned to mold metal, but to speak through it, crafting sculptures that told stories of resilience, hope, and the eternal sun. Rhodes itself had changed. Its population had grown, its defenses improved, and its ports become more vibrant than ever. But the people spoke often of the past, not to long for it, but to walk beside it. The tale of Helios, once told in hushed awe, was now a cornerstone of education, woven into children's earliest lessons. The day of the statue's fall had transformed into a week-long festival, filled with plays, reenacting the events, songs that rose with the sun, and boat processions that circled the harbor in homage. News spread that foreigners, wealthy patrons, and curious kings had begun offering to fund a new Colossus, grander than ever, reaching twice the height of the original and built with the latest knowledge of balance and steel. The Council of Rhodes debated fiercely, weighing pride against prudence. Among the loudest voices in this debate was a young artisan named Thalia. She had grown up playing among the ruins, her fingers tracing every contour and crack as she sketched tirelessly in charcoal and ink. When she stood before the council, her voice was calm but unwavering. "We should not build something to erase what once was," she said. We should build something that invites us to remember. Her words struck a chord deep within the hearts of many. So they decided, not a new Colossus, but a new kind of monument. A garden was planned around the ruins, terraced walkways weaving among ancient olive trees, flowing water channels shimmering in the sunlight, and groves where sun-kissed leaves whispered in the breeze. Bronze sculptures dotted the landscape, hands reaching in yearning, eyes closed in contemplation, faces young and old turned upward toward the eternal sun. At the garden's heart, a flame was to burn, a bronze brazier shaped like Helios's radiant crown, lit perpetually with sacred fire, drawn from the temple's eternal flame. The eternal flame of the sun, they called it. Around its base were engraved the names of every known builder, soldier, priestess, merchant, and child who had perished during the Great Quake. The first to light the flame was Damon's granddaughter, Callista, a poet whose verses had already begun to stir the hearts of the people. Draped in flowing white linen and crowned with delicate olive leaves, she stepped forward and recited, "The God we built was not a man, but a mirror to what we could become. Now broken, yet burning, he lives in us, and so we carry the sun within." The people wept openly, tears mingling with the salty air, as even traders from distant lands, hardened by war and wealth, bowed before the flame. It was no mere spectacle, but a soul made visible. Yet time, as it does, moved on. Generations passed, and the Academy of Bronze flourished as a center of learning and artistry throughout the Hellenistic world. Its graduates found work in temples, palaces, and schools across the Mediterranean. Philosophers debated not only the ethics of art, but the meaning of endurance itself. They argued passionately that the Colossus, fallen though it was, had redefined what it meant to be great. Still, pilgrims came. Quiet boats slipped across the glassy harbor at dawn, their occupants walking barefoot through the garden, hands reaching to touch the cool metal of the ruins. Newlyweds exchanged vows beside the brazier's warm glow. Children dared each other to climb the gentle slope of Helios's buried shoulder. Old songs once forgotten were sung anew, their melodies echoing between olive branches. One rare winter, snow dusted Rhodes in a silent white mantle. The ruins wore their frosty shroud with a quiet dignity, while the eternal flame hissed softly beneath its bronze crown. The city fell into hushed stillness, and people gathered unbidden, standing shoulder to shoulder around the flame and scattered fragments. An old man whispered to a nearby child, "It is beautiful in all seasons." And so it was. Word of the garden spread beyond the borders of the Aegean, reaching distant lands. The site became a sanctuary not only for history lovers, but for those seeking healing. Veterans of far-off wars, widows carrying memories of lost husbands, and young lovers seeking blessings all found solace there, kneeling at the base of the shattered bronze, their tears mixing with the sea breeze. Priests from other temples held ceremonies nearby, drawn by the powerful spiritual resonance of the place. The god Helios, once carved in overwhelming grandeur, now stood as a symbol of mortal endurance and the indomitable human spirit. Even those who did not worship him paid respects, sensing the sacred energy that lingered in the air. Poets continued to arrive, their voices weaving into a new epic, the Song of the Fallen Flame, a work composed over 5 generations by 20 authors, each adding stanzas that celebrated not bloodlines, but shared purpose and perseverance. Eventually, a traveling philosopher from Persia named Ardashir arrived in Rhodes. He had heard tales of the fallen god since youth and journeyed across deserts and seas to witness the sight with his own eyes. When he stood before the bronze remains, He bowed his head and fell silent for hours, as if communing with something beyond words. Later he wrote in his journal, "I have seen towers fall and empires turn to dust. But here stands a silence that sings. It sings of grief, yes, but also of grace." Inspired, Ardashir remained in Rhodes, offering lectures beneath the olive trees of the garden. People flocked not only for his wisdom, but for the way he listened, to their stories, to the wind, to the memory enshrined in bronze. His teachings were later compiled in a scroll titled "The Fire Within the Ruins," which would spread across the known world. Thus, the legacy of the Colossus continued, not in size or grandeur, but in spirit, community, and purpose. The fallen god had become a bridge, not just to the past, but to the best parts of the human soul. And always, always, the sun rose. The salt breeze whispered softly through the olive groves that now framed the Garden of Remembrance, a living tribute to the fallen Colossus. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long, warm shadows over the bronze fragments, scattered like ancient relics amid flowering laurels and creeping ivy. It was a place where the past breathed alongside the present, a sanctuary where the people of Rhodes found both solace and strength. In the heart of this garden, the eternal flame flickered steadily, its light dancing against the faces of those who came to pay homage. Today was a day of gathering, a day to celebrate not just memory, but renewal. Among the crowd stood Nicandros, a young architect with a vision that stretched far beyond the ruins. Born under the shadow of the Colossus's legacy, he had grown fascinated by the delicate balance between ruin and resurrection. His studies took him from dusty scrolls to the clamor of the forge, always searching for ways to blend innovation with tradition. Nicandros had recently returned from Alexandria, where he had apprenticed with some of the greatest engineers of the age. Inspired by their marvels, the towering lighthouses, the grand libraries, he dreamed of a new kind of monument, one that would honor the sun god Helios not through size or spectacle, but through harmony and light. His idea was met with mixed feelings in Rhodes. The older generation clung to the memories of the original Colossus, while younger voices saw potential in Nicandros's vision for a living monument, one that would change with the sun's path, reflecting its rays across the harbor in shimmering patterns, a dance of light that no bronze statue could match. As the ceremony began, elders and children gathered around the flame. Callista, now older and revered as a poet and historian, stepped forward. She held a scroll in her hands, the newest stanza of the Song of the Fallen Flame, composed by Nicandros himself, who had become both architect and chronicler. She read aloud, "From ruin, light is born anew, a prism caught in morning dew, not carved in bronze, but cast in sky, where sun and sea forever lie." Her voice carried across the crowd, weaving a thread between past and future. The people listened, their eyes lifted toward the horizon, where the sun began its slow descent. Boats bobbed gently on the shimmering water, their sails catching the golden glow. The sea seemed to hum with ancient power, as if Helios himself watched and smiled. Nicandros spoke then, his words soft but clear. "We honor the Colossus not by replicating its form, but by embracing its spirit, the light it cast on our lives, and the resilience it inspired. This monument will be one of reflection and movement, changing with the seasons and tides. It will remind us that the sun's journey is never the same, yet always steady." Plans were unveiled for a structure of polished glass and bronze, a colonnade of slender pillars entwined with flowering vines, mirrors angled to catch and scatter sunlight in radiant displays. It would stand not at the harbor's entrance, but overlooking the city, a beacon both visible and intimate. The council debated for days, weighing tradition against innovation. Finally, the decision was unanimous. Construction began with ceremony and fanfare. Artisans, engineers, and laborers from Rhodes and beyond came together, their skills intertwining like threads in a tapestry. As the colonnade rose, so too did the city's spirit. The garden blossomed with new life, colorful blooms, gentle fountains, and shaded benches where visitors could sit and contemplate. Meanwhile, the ruins of the original Colossus remained at the harbor, untouched and honored. The two monuments, the ancient and the new, stood in quiet conversation, one rooted in memory, the other reaching toward the future. Nicandros often walked between them, tracing the cool bronze of the fallen statue and then stepping into the sunlit glow of his creation. He felt a deep connection to both, understanding that greatness was not a single moment, but a continuous story, written by many hands. The days stretched on, and the project grew. Every morning the workers gathered at dawn, their breath visible in the crisp air, their voices mingling with the steady rhythm of hammers and chisels. Children played nearby, chasing each other among the half-finished columns, their laughter carrying across the harbor. Mothers wove baskets of herbs and flowers, bringing fresh garlands for the sight. Nicandros found joy in the smallest details, the way sunlight pierced through the lattice of vines, casting dappled patterns on the stone, the scent of wet clay mingling with the salt air, the murmurs of conversation in many tongues as artisans shared knowledge. Among the craftsmen was Helios, a master glassmaker from Corinth. His delicate hands shaped panes that caught the light like captured flames. Helios believed the monument should not only honor Helios, but embody his essence, light itself made tangible. He taught apprentices to fashion glass, so thin it seemed to hold the sky within. Near him worked Eudora, a sculptor whose gentle touch coaxed life from bronze. She crafted intricate leaves and solar motifs to entwine the pillars, celebrating both nature and divinity. Her work was poetry in metal, shimmering with the warmth of the sun. Nicandros grew close to both, drawn not only by their skill, but by their shared passion for the project's meaning. Together they envisioned a monument that would inspire generations, a place where people could feel the pulse of light and history in their veins. One afternoon, as the sun hung high and the sea sparkled endlessly, Nicandros and Callista met beside the eternal flame. She was preparing for a new recital, weaving together ancient hymns and fresh verses. "Your vision brings hope," she said softly. "It reminds us that memory must evolve, or it dies." Nicandros nodded. "The Colossus taught us to dream big, but sometimes the greatest strength is in humility, in listening to the light rather than trying to cage it." Their conversation drifted to the stories of Helios, the ancient sun god whose chariot blazed across the heavens. They spoke of myths and men, of gods who fell and mortals who rose. It was a dialogue between past and future, between what was lost and what could be born anew. As seasons turned, the colonnade neared completion. The final pieces arrived, a massive polished disc of bronze meant to crown the structure, engraved with scenes of the sun's journey across the sky. It gleamed like a second sun, promising to catch and amplify every ray. The people of Rhodes celebrated the unveiling with a festival unlike any before. Musicians played lyres and flutes, dancers swirled beneath banners of gold and crimson. Stories were told of Helios's light, defeating darkness, of the Colossus standing tall against invaders, and of the resilience woven into every brick and beam. Nicandros, Helios, and Eudora stood together, watching the sun dip low. As the last light touched the bronze disc, it flared brilliantly, reflecting and scattering beams in a radiant halo that bathed the crowd in warmth. The eternal flame flickered in answer, a silent vow that the spirit of Helios would never fade. The city felt transformed. Where once only ruins had stood, now stood a living testament, a monument not frozen in time, but alive with light, growth, and memory. Years later, travelers from distant lands spoke of Rhodes as the city where the sun never ceased to shine. They spoke not just of its monuments, but of its people, keepers of stories, builders of hope. Nicandros grew older, his hair silvering like the dawn. He often sat beneath the colonnade, watching children chase shadows and lovers whisper beneath the vines. The garden had become a place of peace, learning, and inspiration. One evening, as the sun sank into the sea, Nicandros wrote in his journal, "Greatness is not the height of a statue, nor the bronze it's cast in. It is the light we carry forward, the stories we pass on, and the warmth that never fades." And always, always, the sun rose. The early morning sun cast a golden haze over Rhodes, bathing the city and its monuments in a warm, forgiving light. The Garden of Remembrance thrived, its pathways worn smooth by the feet of countless pilgrims, merchants, and townsfolk who came to seek solace or inspiration. The colonnade shimmered with the dance of light and shadow, a living testament to the enduring spirit of Helios. Yet beneath this bright surface, a subtle tension stirred, a whisper carried on the wind, a murmur threading through the olive groves and glinting on the waves of the harbor. Change was in the air. The city was growing, its population swelling with merchants and travelers from far-flung lands, and with growth came new challenges, old fears, and questions that no amount of light could easily dispel. Nicandros had long since passed into memory, but his vision lived on. The Academy of Bronze flourished beside the garden, its halls filled with eager minds, dedicated to blending art, science, and philosophy. Within its marble walls, the old and the new merged, as students learned to wield bronze like the ancient masters, while also studying geometry, astronomy, and the mysteries of nature. Among its newest pupils was Theros, a young sculptor whose talent for capturing the human form was matched only by his restless curiosity. Tall and thoughtful, with dark eyes that seemed to look beyond the present moment, Theros was fascinated by the stories embedded in the Colossus's ruins and the light that bathed the city each day. He found himself drawn repeatedly to the fragments of the original Colossus, now carefully preserved beneath a protective canopy. He would sit for hours, tracing the jagged edges of fractured bronze with his fingers, imagining the thunderous crash when the great statue fell, the roar of the earthquake, and the sea swallowing its broken pieces as if reclaiming a sacred secret. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the garden, Theros's mentor, Eudora, who had once worked alongside Nicandros and Callias, came to stand beside him. "You see only what lies before you," she said gently, "but art, true art, asks us to see what lies beneath. The shadow and the light both speak. The spaces between the bronze speak louder than the bronze itself." Theros turned, considering her words. "I want my work to say something new, to honor what was lost, but also what remains, what can be born again." Eudora smiled knowingly. "That is a rare gift. Do not fear the shadows. They are the shape of stories, yet untold." As the seasons turned, the city itself felt the ripple of change. Trade brought prosperity, but also envy and unrest. New voices rose in the council, some eager to expand Rhodes's power, others wary of overreach. Among these was Demetrios, a charismatic orator and military strategist whose words stirred both hope and fear. His vision was one of reclaiming Rhodes's ancient glory through strength, a city that would command the seas with fleets larger than any before. Demetrios's speeches echoed through the marble halls and marketplaces, appealing to those who remembered the threats that once loomed over Rhodes. "We are not a city to be cowered before," he declared. "The Colossus fell, yes, but only because we forgot our strength. It is time to build new walls, new ships, and new power to protect what is ours." His call for a grand navy and fortified walls was met with both applause and unease. The younger generation, inspired by Nicandros's monument of light and culture, feared that such ambition might invite war rather than peace. Among the dissenters was Myrine, Callista's granddaughter and a renowned musician and philosopher. With melodies that captured the shifting patterns of light across the harbor, she believed that true strength lay in culture, dialogue, and unity rather than force. One evening, under a sky strewn with stars and the silver arc of the moon, Myrine and Demetrios met in the garden beside the eternal flame. The flickering fire cast long shadows as their voices rose and fell in passionate debate. "You forget," Myrine said softly, her voice steady despite the tension, "that the Colossus fell not because of weakness, but because of hubris. True power is in humility, knowing when to raise the light and when to let it rest." Demetrios's eyes glinted with fervor. "And what of enemies who respect only strength? Will songs and light defend us when the sea darkens with warships? Our walls must be higher, our fleets stronger, or we will fall again." Their exchange captured the city's growing divide between tradition and ambition, peace and power. It was a rift reflected in every corner of Rhodes, from the bustling port to the tranquil olive groves. Meanwhile, Theros' sculpture neared completion. It was unlike anything Rhodes had seen before, a figure half formed from bronze and half fading into shadow, reaching toward the sun with hands both strong and tentative. He called it the threshold, a reminder that every ending is also a beginning, that light and shadow intertwine in the dance of life. At the unveiling ceremony, the crowd gathered beneath the colonnade was silent, moved by the sculpture's haunting beauty. The setting sun cast a glow on the bronze, making the figure seem almost alive, caught between worlds. Callista rose to recite a new stanza of the Song of the Fallen Flame, a poem passed down through generations, evolving like the city itself. Between the light and shadow lies a path where hope and memory rise. In broken bronze and whispered song, we find the place where we belong. The garden became a place of reconciliation, where debates and dreams mingled beneath the eternal sun. It was a sanctuary where citizens of all views could come to remember their shared heritage and ponder the city's future. Yet, as Rhodes looked to the future with cautious hope, ancient fears refused to be silenced. Strange omens began to appear, violent storms breaking suddenly on clear days, the sea swirling with dark, restless currents, and shadows that seemed to linger longer than they should beneath the colonnade's light. Fishermen spoke of eerie lights beneath the waves, and merchants whispered of unusual alliances forming in distant lands. The priests of Helios convened in urgent council at the temple. Their voices were grave as they debated the meaning of these signs, interpreting them as a divine warning, that the balance between man and God, between power and humility, was fragile. They called upon the people to remember the lessons of the past, the dangers of pride, and the need for reverence. In response, the city declared a festival of light, a week-long celebration of Helios's power and Rhodes's resilience. Lanterns of bronze and glass were lit and carried in processions through the streets, while music and dance filled the night air. Stories of gods and heroes were shared beneath the open sky, reminding all of the sun's eternal journey and the strength found in unity. Among the revelers was Theros, who found solace in the community's spirit. He walked the lantern-lit paths, feeling the warmth of countless voices, joining in song and story, understanding that the legacy of the Colossus was not only in bronze or flame, but lived in the hearts of the people. But not all shadows were mere metaphor. A lone figure, cloaked in dark robes, moved silently along the harbor's edge near the ruins. Eyes gleaming with determination, the stranger observed the flickering flames of the eternal flame and the new monument's glowing pillars. Whispered rumors followed, secret plots, old rivalries rekindled, and a looming threat that might yet test Rhodes's light in ways the city had never seen. As the festival drew to a close, a sudden storm rolled in from the sea. Lightning flashed, thunder cracked, and rain hammered the stone paths. The eternal flame flickered, but did not die. Rhodes held its breath. The sun would rise again, as always, but shadows had returned to the city of the sun. The dawn broke heavy and thick over Rhodes, a curtain of leaden clouds blotting out the sun's usual golden warmth. The eternal flame in the garden flickered weakly beneath the lash of sudden gusts, its bronze brazier wreathed in smoke that spiraled and twisted like restless spirits. The sea beyond the harbor churned in turbulent waves, dark and foreboding, as if the gods themselves had turned their gaze away. A restless unease had settled over the city, felt not only in the sharp bite of the chill wind, but in the hurried footsteps along cobblestone streets, the low murmur of guarded conversations, and the furtive glances cast toward the horizon. Rhodes, long a beacon of hope and light in the Aegean, was poised at a precipice between memory and destiny. In the marble halls of the council, heated voices echoed beneath vaulted ceilings, painted with scenes of heroic battles and divine intervention. Demetrios, the fiery orator and war strategist, stood at the center of the chamber, his commanding presence stirring the assembly. "Our enemies gather beyond the waves, testing our resolve," he declared, pounding his fist upon the polished stone table. "We cannot hide behind relics of the past. It is time to arm our city anew, to raise walls that no storm can breach, and to launch fleets that command respect across the seas. Rhodes must stand unyielding." Opposing him was Marine, the philosopher-poet and voice of tempered reason. Her eyes glowed with quiet strength as she stepped forward, her words weaving calm amidst the storm of rhetoric. "Strength is forged not only in arms, but in wisdom and unity," Marine replied softly, her voice carrying a steadiness that made the assembly pause. "We must seek allies, foster understanding, and embrace the lessons of our ancestors, not simply brandish swords and build battlements. The sun shines equally on friend and foe. Perhaps that is a lesson we must learn anew." The debate stretched long into the night, the council divided as deeply as the city itself. Factions coalesced around visions of power and peace, tradition and innovation. Some remembered the fall of the Colossus and feared the consequences of hubris. Others saw in Demetrios's plans the promise of a new era, one where Rhodes could reclaim her place among the great powers of the Mediterranean. Outside, the city pulsed with uncertainty. Markets closed early, and fishermen eyed the storm-darkened horizon with growing dread. Mothers gathered their children close, telling them tales of gods who could both destroy and protect, while elders whispered of prophecies and omens long forgotten. Theros, the young sculptor whose creation, the Threshold, had become a symbol of the city's delicate balance, found himself caught between these tides. Each day, he walked the paths of the garden, studying the interplay of bronze and shadow in his work, seeking the meaning hidden within the contrasts. One evening, beneath a sky heavy with gathering clouds, Theros paused near the ruins of the original Colossus. The fragmented bronze gleamed dimly beneath the lantern light, as if holding on to the last embers of a great fire. It was there he encountered the enigmatic stranger, the figure cloaked in indigo robes embroidered with threads of gold. "You seek answers in the dance of light and shadow," the stranger said, voice low and resonant like the rolling sea. "But remember, the brightest flame casts the darkest shadow. It is in embracing both that wisdom is born." Theros looked deeply into the stranger's eyes and nodded, though the words stirred more questions than answers within him. As days passed, the tension in Rhodes thickened. Rumors of ships bearing strange banners reached the harbor, and mysterious gatherings were reported in the hills beyond the city. Merchants spoke in hushed tones of alliances forged and broken. Spies moved unseen through crowded streets. The Temple of Helios became a center of urgent activity. Priests and priestesses held nightly vigils, lighting incense and chanting prayers for protection and guidance. The oracles, once silent for many years, began to speak in cryptic verses, warning of a reckoning that would test not only Rhodes' strength, but the very soul of its people. Within the Academy of Bronze, artisans worked feverishly, forging new weapons and reinforcing city defenses. Helios, the master glassmaker, labored alongside apprentices to craft polished shields that glittered like captured sunlight, designed to deflect both blade and arrow. Eudora, the sculptor who had once worked with Nicandros and Theros' mentor, wrought intricate reliefs depicting scenes of heroism and divine favor. Her hands moved deftly, turning bronze and stone into symbols meant to inspire courage in the hearts of soldiers and citizens alike. The city itself transformed into a living fortress, yet beneath the surface, the people clung to hope and the promise of peace. Nicandros' colonnade, once a gentle monument to light and renewal, now took on a new role. It became a gathering place where diplomats and soldiers convened. The polished bronze disc, crowning its highest point, catching every ray of a reluctant sun, casting prismatic beams across the harbor like a beacon calling for unity. In a secluded chamber overlooking the restless sea, Marine met with envoys from Crete and Cyprus. Their faces were grave, but determined as they discussed fragile alliances and shared concerns. "We desire peace, but the currents of war grow stronger each day," an envoy from Crete said quietly. "Rhodes must choose its allies wisely and swiftly." Marine nodded. "Only through unity and understanding can we withstand the storm to come. Together, we can preserve the light of our cities." Then came the night of the great storm. Winds howled like ancient spirits, tearing at rooftops and uprooting olive trees. Lightning cleaved the sky in jagged bursts, illuminating the terrified faces of the city's inhabitants. Waves crashed fiercely against the harbor walls, threatening to spill over and drown the streets in brine. The eternal flame, shielded but exposed, sputtered wildly. Citizens gathered beneath awnings and in stone alcoves, clutching to each other and whispering prayers. Suddenly, a cry shattered the roar of the tempest. The lookout towers spotted ships, a fleet of shadow-black hulls, sails taut and bearing unfamiliar insignia. The enemy had come. Demetrios swiftly rallied the defenders, his voice cutting through the storm. Soldiers armed themselves and took positions along the city walls, their armor glinting faintly in flashes of lightning. Marine, undeterred by the chaos, led chants and hymns, calling upon Helios to protect the city. Her voice rose above the storm, a beacon of hope and defiance. Theros, trembling but determined, lit hundreds of lanterns throughout the city, each one a small shining promise of resistance against the encroaching darkness. As the enemy fleet approached, the colonnade's polished surfaces caught the fleeting rays of sunlight piercing the storm clouds. They scattered beams in dazzling arrays, light bursts that danced across the water like fireflies in the night. The battle that followed was fierce and unrelenting. Waves of enemy forces clashed against Rhodes's walls and warriors. The city's defenders fought not merely with weapons, but with the weight of history and the spirit of the sun god behind them. When dawn finally broke, the storm had passed. The sea lay calm, kissed by a soft golden light that bathed the battered city. Though Rhodes bore scars, cracked walls, shattered ships, and countless lost souls, the flame of its spirit burned brighter than ever. The eternal flame still blazed steadily, a defiant symbol against the shadows. In the aftermath, songs rose to the skies. New verses were added to the song of the fallen flame, each one a tribute to courage, resilience, and hope. Theros stood once more before the threshold, feeling the weight of shadow and light balance perfectly in his heart. He whispered softly, "We carry the sun within us, always, even when storms gather, even when shadows fall." And the sun rose. The days that followed the tempest were marked by a delicate balance of mourning and resilience. Rhodes bore its wounds like a warrior's scars. The city's ancient walls cracked and battered. The harbor littered with the remains of ships that once sailed proud beneath the sun. Yet amidst this visible damage, there was an undercurrent of determination that flowed through the narrow streets and bustling marketplaces. Life, as it always did, found a way to persist. The eternal flame, which had once danced precariously in the fierce winds of the storm, now burned more steadily than ever, its golden glow casting a warm light across the newly tended gardens that surrounded the ruins of the original Colossus. Bronze sculptures stood sentinel among olive trees and fragrant herbs, their surfaces gleaming softly in the light of dawn and dusk. Theros, the young sculptor, found himself drawn repeatedly to his creation. The threshold, now fully realized and placed at the heart of the garden. The sculpture, half bathed in radiant bronze, half fading into shadowed stone, seemed to pulse with the city's collective heartbeat. To him, it was more than art. It was a living symbol of the fragile but powerful balance between light and darkness, between loss and hope. The garden had become a gathering place for all of Rhodes. Mothers brought their children to trace the cool lines of the bronze figures, teaching them the stories of courage and endurance that the statues embodied. Soldiers knelt in silent prayer beside the pieces, seeking strength for the uncertain days ahead. Poets and philosophers lingered beneath the dappled shade, weaving words inspired by the interplay of sun and shadow. Within the walls of the Academy of Bronze, the sound of hammer striking metal echoed with renewed vigor. The workshops bustled with artisans, young and old alike, who labored tirelessly to create objects of beauty and utility, blending traditional methods with new techniques born of necessity. Eudora, the Academy's revered master sculptor, moved through the workshops with the calm authority of a seasoned leader, offering guidance and encouragement. "Remember," she said one afternoon to a group of apprentices, her eyes steady and bright, "our work is not only to mold bronze or cast statues. We are shaping the spirit of Rhodes itself. Every piece must carry the stories of those who endured, of those who believed in a future beyond the storm." Beyond the Academy, the city itself was alive with preparations for a festival unlike any before. This celebration would not only honor Helios, the sun god who had watched over them for centuries, but would serve as a public vow, a renewal of the city's spirit and unity. Lanterns, crafted from bronze and delicate blown glass, were meticulously fashioned, each inscribed with protective symbols and hopeful verses. Gardeners tended the olive groves and wildflowers with renewed devotion, their hands gentle but purposeful. Sculptors worked through the nights, crafting new monuments to honor the everyday heroes, the fishermen who braved stormy seas, the merchants who kept the city's lifeblood flowing, the mothers who nurtured hope in the darkest hours. These figures would stand alongside the great gods and legendary heroes, ensuring their bravery was not forgotten. Marine, standing atop the gleaming colonnade that overlooked the harbor, felt the weight of the city's grief and hope settle heavily on her shoulders. The sun broke through the lingering clouds, bathing the restless waters in molten gold, as if blessing the city with its promise of rebirth. Beside her, Callista, the granddaughter of the late Nicandros, whose legacy had inspired so much of the city's recent renewal, spoke softly. "The council remains divided, Myrine. Some cling to the old ways, fearing change, while others push for new paths. But the people look to you, and to us all, to lead them forward." Myrine's gaze hardened with resolve. The Colossus was never just a statue. It was an idea, a symbol of courage, resilience, and unity. Our renewal must honor that idea by forging a future that embraces both our history and the promise of what is yet to come. News of the festival and Rhodes's resilience traveled far beyond the city's walls. Envoys from neighboring city-states arrived bearing gifts, letters of support, and offers of alliance. The Mediterranean seemed to watch, inspired by the city that refused to be broken. Within the grand halls of the Temple of Helios, Demetrios, once a fierce general, now a tempered leader, sought out Myrine. Their past debates, fiery and often contentious, had softened into a partnership forged in the crucible of hardship. "We fought to defend Rhodes with every breath," Demetrios said quietly, his voice heavy with both pride and sorrow. "But now we must fight to rebuild, not just walls and fleets, but trust among our people, our allies, and ourselves." Myrine nodded, her eyes reflecting the flickering light of the eternal flame. That may be the greatest challenge of all. As the festival dawned, the city transformed. Streets overflowed with vibrant colors and sounds. Lyres and flutes mingled with the rhythmic beat of dancers' feet. Children's laughter intertwined with the booming voices of poets reciting ancient and new verses alike. The air was thick with the scent of roasted figs, honeyed wine, fresh bread, and wild herbs, a fragrant testament to the city's enduring vitality. At the heart of the celebration, Theros unveiled his latest masterpiece, the bronze phoenix, wings outstretched in majestic flight, rose from a nest of shattered bronze shards, the remnants of the city's trials. The sculpture captured the light so masterfully it seemed alive, a tangible embodiment of Rhodes's spirit, rising from ruin to soar again. The crowd fell silent, awestruck by the work's beauty and meaning. Tears glistened in many eyes, and when applause finally broke out, it rolled like thunder through the streets, a wave of shared hope and joy. That night, beneath a sky littered with stars, Myrine and Demetrios stood side by side by the eternal flame. The music and laughter of the festival softened to a gentle murmur, replaced by the soothing sound of waves against the harbor walls. "The sun will rise again," Myrine whispered, voice steady and full of conviction. Demetrios placed a steady hand on her shoulder, eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "And so will Rhodes," he replied, his words a solemn vow. The city breathed around them, scarred, weary, but unbroken, ready to face the uncertain future. The flame burned bright, a beacon of light and hope carried in the hearts of all who called Rhodes home. The turning of seasons was marked by a slow, steady renewal that pulsed through Rhodes like the tides themselves. Every dawn seemed to wash the city anew, as if the gods had swept away the shadows of despair and cleared a path for light and life. The scars, etched into stone and flesh by war and tempest, remained, silent reminders of sacrifice and struggle. But they no longer defined the city's spirit. Instead, they became the foundation on which Rhodes rebuilt, not just its walls, but its soul. The streets teemed once again with the bustling symphony of daily life. Merchants shouted their wares in the markets, their voices mingling with the laughter of children darting between stalls. Artisans worked diligently in their workshops, their skilled hands shaping clay, bronze, and marble into objects both beautiful and functional. The air was rich with the scent of fresh bread, fragrant herbs, sea salt, and the smoke of hearth fires. Above it all, the sunlight bathed the city in warm gold, casting long, shimmering reflections across the harbor's restless waters. Yet Rhodes was undergoing more than a physical restoration. It was crafting a new identity, the legacy of the Colossus, once a towering statue of divine power guarding the harbor's entrance, had transformed in the collective consciousness from mere monument to profound symbol. It represented resilience, hope, unity, and the indomitable will of mortals to rise again, no matter how fierce the storm. Perched atop the sunlit cliffs, the Academy of Bronze had blossomed into a beacon of intellectual and creative life. It was a place where sculptors, philosophers, architects, engineers, and statesmen mingled, debated, and dreamed. The Academy's halls echoed with heated discussions on ethics, the nature of beauty, the role of art in society, and the responsibility of leadership. New technologies and artistic techniques were studied and refined, blending the ancient wisdom of Rhodes with innovations from across the Mediterranean. Theros, now acclaimed far beyond Rhodes, stood before his latest monumental work, a vast bronze relief etched into the wall of the city's great assembly hall. This relief told the sweeping story of Rhodes, from its mythic founding and the glory days of the Colossus, through the devastations of war and nature, to the city's fierce rebirth. Every figure was alive with emotion. Warriors locked in battle, priests calling upon the gods, families clutching each other in hope and fear, artisans laboring through the night. The relief was not just history, it was a living testament to human endurance. His apprentice Lysandra worked alongside him, her eyes bright with admiration and hunger to learn. "Master Theros," she said quietly one evening as the golden sun slipped below the horizon, "your work breathes life into our past. I feel the city's spirit pulsing through these bronze veins." Theros smiled, brushing a streak of bronze dust from his brow. "Our history is the bedrock upon which we stand, but it is the future, unknown and unwritten, that calls us forward. We must honor both." Politics in Rhodes had also evolved, reflecting the city's renewed spirit. The council, once the domain of aristocrats and priests alone, had expanded to include representatives from all corners of society: merchants, craftsmen, warriors, and scholars. Callista's impassioned speeches had helped knit these disparate voices into a stronger, more united assembly. She spoke tirelessly of inclusivity, progress, and the need to build a future that honored both tradition and change. One warm afternoon, Marine gathered with Callista and Demetrios beneath the shade of ancient olive trees near the Agora's heart. Their faces were serious, their voices measured but fervent as they planned a new monument. not just a tribute to gods or kings, but a living symbol of the city's collective strength. The new monument must be at the city's core, Marine said firmly, not a distant statue for passing ships to glimpse, but a presence woven into the fabric of our daily lives, where all can see it, touch it, and draw courage from it. Demetrios nodded thoughtfully. It should honor not just the heroes recorded in history, but the countless unnamed souls, the mothers, fishermen, soldiers, merchants, who built and defended Rhodes. Callista's eyes shone with vision, and it must capture light, both the sun's brilliance and the inner flame of courage and hope that burns in every heart here. The city rallied around this vision. Bronze smiths forged delicate lanterns, engraved with prayers and blessings. Glassmakers crafted glowing orbs to amplify and scatter light across streets and plazas. And gardeners planted new groves of olive and cypress, their branches whispering promises of peace and continuity. The sacred eternal flame, tended with reverence by the priests, continued to burn brightly, its steady glow a spiritual anchor for Rhodes's people. Pilgrims arrived from distant lands, drawn by tales of the city's resilience and the sacred fire's undying light. Among these was Irenaeus, a wandering scholar whose passion for history and human stories led him to gather oral histories, songs, and prayers from every corner of Rhodes. His journals would become treasured chronicles, preserving the voices of the ordinary and extraordinary alike. The baker whose oven never cooled, the sailor who braved tempestuous seas, the child who dreamed of a peaceful future. Through his words, Rhodes's living legacy stretched beyond time and place. The day of the festival arrived with a brilliance that seemed to touch even the heavens. Streets overflowed with color, sound, and life. Lyres and flutes sang melodies, ancient and new. Dancers moved with joyous abandon, beneath banners embroidered with suns, waves, and flames. The aroma of roasted figs, mingled with honey and fresh bread, a fragrant testament to life's sweetness amidst hardship. At the festival's heart, Theros unveiled his newest masterpiece, a colossal bronze and marble monument depicting a circle of figures, old and young, men and women, their hands joined as they gazed skyward, faces alight with determination and hope. The monument's intricate details caught the fading sunlight, casting dancing shadows that seemed to breathe with the city's pulse. The crowd fell silent, breath held in awe. Then cheers erupted, swelling like a tide washing over every heart. Tears glistened on cheeks, hands clasped, voices joined in songs of hope. Marine stepped forward, her voice carrying clear across the assembly. This monument is more than bronze and marble. It is the embodiment of Rhodes's soul. The gods may watch from above, but it is our hands, hearts, and wills that shape our destiny. The legacy of the Colossus lives on, in every soul that calls Rhodes home. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden halo upon the monument, the eternal flame blazed brighter than ever, its radiant light a beacon guiding Rhodes into a future forged by courage, unity, and unyielding hope. Years had passed since the unveiling of the great monument that embodied the spirit of Rhodes, yet the city's story was far from finished. Time, relentless and impartial, continued its steady march, weaving new threads into the rich tapestry of the island's legacy. The sun rose and set with unerring regularity, bathing Rhodes in golden light, a constant reminder of Helios's eternal watch. Marine stood once more atop the cliff overlooking the harbor, her gaze sweeping across the waters where the original Colossus had stood centuries before. The ruins, though long since reclaimed by earth and sea, remained sacred ground, embraced now by the flourishing garden and the eternal flame. The air was warm, carrying the scent of salt and wildflowers. the sound of children's laughter drifting upward from the city below. Beside her stood Callista, older now, her face lined with wisdom but still radiant with the fire of purpose. The legacy of the Colossus has become more than bronze and stone, Callista said softly. It lives in the hearts of all who call Rhodes home. It teaches us that even the greatest can fall, but the spirit of a people endures. Marine nodded, feeling the weight and warmth of those words. We are the heirs of those who dared to dream, those who built, who fought, who believed. The sun's light touches all, but it is our choice how brightly we let our own flames burn. In the city, the Academy of Bronze thrived as a beacon of knowledge and creativity. Its halls echoed with the voices of students and masters alike, all dedicated to the pursuit of art, science, and philosophy. Sculptors crafted works that captured not only form, but emotion and history, while engineers and scholars pushed the boundaries of innovation. Theros, now regarded as one of Rhodes's greatest artists, prepared for his final masterpiece, a statue to stand in the city's heart. A figure that would embody both the mortal and divine, the past and future, light and shadow. It was a daunting task, but one he embraced with the passion of a lifetime. Meanwhile, the city council had evolved into a symbol of inclusive governance, reflecting the diverse voices and talents of Rhodes's people. Callista served as a guiding force, championing education, justice, and the preservation of history. Under her leadership, Rhodes had become a shining example of unity amid diversity, resilience amid adversity. The Festival of the Eternal Sun, born from the ashes of devastation, had become an annual celebration that drew visitors from across the Mediterranean. Lanterns floated on the harbor's waters, symbolizing hopes and dreams set free. Music, poetry, and dance filled the streets, weaving together ancient traditions and new stories. One evening, as the festival reached its zenith, a procession wound through the city, carrying the newly completed statue. It was unveiled amidst a chorus of gasps and tears, an imposing yet graceful figure of a man holding a radiant orb aloft, his eyes lifted to the heavens. The statue was not a god, but a mortal, a symbol of humanity's capacity to reach for the divine through courage, wisdom, and unity. Marine stepped forward to speak, her voice carrying over the crowd like a warm breeze. This statue represents all of us, the builders, the dreamers, the fighters, the lovers of Rhodes. It reminds us that while the sun sets each night, it always rises again. So too does our spirit. May we carry the eternal sun within us always. As twilight deepened into night, the eternal flame blazed atop its brazier, casting a golden glow that mingled with the stars above. Families gathered around the fire, sharing stories passed down through generations. Children listened wide-eyed to tales of the great Colossus, of heroes past and present, of challenges met and overcome. Far beyond Rhodes, the story of the Colossus had become legend, a timeless beacon of hope and resilience, inspiring countless souls across distant lands. Poets sang of its glory and fall. Philosophers debated its meaning, and artists sought to capture its spirit. But for the people of Rhodes, the true legacy was living and breathing all around them, in their unity, their perseverance, and their unyielding hope. As the first light of dawn touched the horizon, Marine looked toward the sun, feeling its warmth on her face. The city stirred below, alive with possibility and promise. The eternal dance of light and shadow continued, but Rhodes was ready for whatever challenges the future might hold. For in their hearts burned a flame that no storm could extinguish, the flame of the eternal sun.